This Easter, my sister Genevieve put a place card at my seat. The failure. My brother-in-law Sterling rubbed it in, saying, "I deserved it. They don't know the sacrifices I made for our parents while they lived their dream." I just smiled, but I held a secret that would turn their perfect world upside down. I'm ready to share my story. Share. And tell me where you're listening from. The drive to Genevieve's sprawling colonial home always filled me with a familiar mix of dread and resignation. Easter was supposed to be about rebirth, family, and joy. For me, it was an annual pilgrimage into my sister's perfectly curated world, a world designed to highlight everything she had and everything I supposedly lacked. I clutched the box containing my homemade carrot cake, a recipe passed down from our grandmother, feeling the warmth of the ceramic against my fingers. It was a small offering, a piece of tradition in a house that had forgotten tradition. Genevieve met me at the door, her smile wide and bright, a little too bright. "Eleanor, darling. You made it." Her hug was brief, her eyes already scanning for my contribution. She spotted the box. "Oh, how quaint," she said, the words dripping with a forced cheer that made my skin prickle. It was her standard greeting for anything that wasn't designer or extravagant. This house, our childhood home, was now unrecognizable. Gone were the worn wooden floors, the slightly chipped fireplace mantel, the faded wallpaper that held ghosts of our laughter. Genevieve and Sterling had graciously taken over, a phrase that always tasted bitter in my mouth. They had stripped it bare, making it sleek, modern, and utterly impersonal. Every trace of our shared past had been erased, replaced by expensive, soulless decor. It felt less like a home and more like a high-end showroom. Sterling was already in the living room, a crystal glass in his hand, the amber liquid swirling with ice. It was barely noon. He glanced up from his whiskey, gave me a perfunctory nod. "Eleanor? Drink?" His voice was flat, an obligation rather than an invitation. I politely declined, already feeling the familiar chill of their disregard. I carried my cake to the kitchen, carefully placing it on the gleaming marble counter. Genevieve watched, then, with a delicate hand, moved it to the very back, behind an array of elaborate, store-bought desserts that looked like they belonged in a magazine. A tiered chocolate mousse creation, delicate lemon tarts, and a shimmering fruit gelatin stood proudly, overshadowing my humble, heartfelt offering. It was a small gesture, but the message was clear. My effort, my love, was not good enough for her perfectly arranged display. The dining room was set for a feast. Polished silver, crystal goblets, and fresh flowers adorned the immense mahogany table. My eyes scanned the place settings, looking for my name. It was at the very end, tucked away in the least prominent spot, almost out of sight. My heart sank, but I told myself it was fine. It was just a seat. Then I saw it. The elegant script, normally used for guests' names, instead bore two words that punched the air from my lungs. The failure. I froze, staring at the card, the words burning into my eyes. The failure. Not Eleanor. Not Aunt Eleanor. Just the failure. A sick, cold wave washed over me. Had she really done this? Out in the open? For everyone to see? My niece, Olivia, a sweet girl of 16, must have noticed my stillness. She came over, her brow furrowed in concern. Her eyes followed mine to the place card. Her face fell. "Oh, Aunt Eleanor," she began hesitantly, her voice low. "I'm sure it's just Mom's weird sense of humor." She tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. She wanted to dismiss it, to make it better. But the cruelty of it hung heavy in the air. Before I could even respond, Sterling approached, the scent of whiskey preceding him. He put a heavy hand on my shoulder, swaying slightly. "It's Easter. Lighten up," he chuckled. A harsh, grating sound. He clearly thought this was hilarious. Then, he leaned in, his voice dropping slightly, but loud enough for Olivia to hear. "It's not like it's not true, is it?" he said, adding salt to the gaping wound. 58 years old, never married, no kids, still renting that same apartment, working at the library, shelving books. He made shelving books sound like the lowest form of existence. His words were a public humiliation, a brutal summary of everything society, and my family, deemed as my shortcomings. I stood there, the weight of his words pressing down on me, and memories flooded my mind. Memories of Mom's last years, her frail body needing constant care, memories of Dad's slow decline, his confusion growing day by day. Genevieve had been off, building her perfect life, her perfect career, her perfect family. I was the one who stayed, the one who sacrificed my youth, my dreams, my chance at what Sterling called a normal life. I gave up everything to take care of Mom and Dad, while Genevieve bought this house, while Genevieve lived her dream. The resentment, buried deep for years, bubbled to the surface. Just then, Genevieve swept into the room, her eyes sparkling, oblivious or uncaring of the scene she had created. "Eleanor is just being dramatic as usual," she announced, dismissing my pain with a wave of her perfectly manicured hand. Her smile was unwavering, her facade impenetrable. In that moment, a sudden clarity washed over me. It wasn't about my failures at all. Genevieve didn't mock me because I was a failure. She mocked me because she needed me to be one. My perceived lack of success was the backdrop against which her own shallow achievements shone brightest. She needed me to be the failure to validate her perfect life. My struggle made her feel superior, more secure in her gilded cage. It was a sick, twisted dynamic, and I suddenly understood it with chilling precision. And then, something else clicked. A secret, a quiet truth I held close. Something Genevieve knew nothing about. Something that had been simmering, waiting for the right moment. I realized I held the power to turn her perfectly arranged table, her perfectly constructed life, completely upside down. The thought was a cool balm to my burning humiliation. A calm settled over me. A strange, resolute peace. I looked from the place card to Genevieve, then to Sterling, then to Olivia, whose eyes still held a glimmer of sympathy. My face was neutral, my voice steady. "Let's eat," I said, a faint smile touching my lips. "I'm starving." I took my seat, the furthest one from Genevieve, right next to the damning place card. The game had just begun. The first course, a delicate asparagus soup, arrived, served by a caterer who moved with silent efficiency. I sat at my designated failure spot, trying to project an air of calm I didn't entirely feel. Mrs. Miller, a friend of Genevieve's, seated across from me, started her usual line of questioning. "Still at the library, dear?" she asked, her tone dripping with polite pity. Before I could answer, Genevieve jumped in, her voice light and dismissive. "Oh, Mrs. Miller, Eleanor simply prefers stability. Not everyone is cut out for the fast-paced world, you know. She enjoys her books." She made it sound like I was an oddity, a relic. But then Olivia, bless her heart, spoke up. "Aunt Eleanor isn't just shelving books, Mom. She's incredibly skilled. She helped me so much with my thesis research last year. I was stuck, couldn't find anything, and Aunt Eleanor went through microfiches, old archives. She found sources no one else could locate. My professor was so impressed. A small warmth spread through me. Olivia had always seen me, truly seen me, unlike the others. Genevieve, however, was clearly annoyed by the interruption to her narrative. "Yes. Well, Olivia, that's lovely. But speaking of impressive, Sterling just closed a massive commercial property deal last week. Didn't you, dear?" She turned to Sterling, her smile fixed, desperate to redirect the conversation to their successes. Sterling, emboldened by another glass of whiskey, mumbled something about vision and leverage, puffing out his chest. As the meal progressed, I started to notice things. Little cracks in Genevieve's perfectly polished facade. Her laugh was a touch too loud. Her smile a little too brittle. Every time a purchase was mentioned, a new car, a piece of art, their upcoming European vacation, she would glance at Sterling, a fleeting flicker of tension in her eyes. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but I saw it. It wasn't the look of a confident woman, but one who was holding her breath. Mid-meal, I excused myself to use the restroom. The house was large, and the facilities were down a long hallway, past Sterling's home office. As I approached, I heard voices, sharp and hushed, coming from behind the closed door. Sterling's booming voice, then another, younger one. Leo, their eldest son. I paused, out of sight. My curiosity piqued. "Dad! I can't keep lying to the bank examiner," Leo hissed, his voice strained with desperation. "The numbers don't add up. They're going to find out." Sterling's response was a sharp snap. "The properties are underwater, Leo. We both know that. But no one will look closely if you just keep your mouth shut and stick to the story. We just need a little more time." Underwater properties? Lying to a bank examiner? My mind raced. The pieces began to click into place. Genevieve's tension, Sterling's excessive drinking, their desperate need to showcase wealth. Their perfect facade was cracking. Their real estate empire, the foundation of their endless boasts, and Genevieve's superiority complex, was built on sand. I quietly continued to the restroom, my heart pounding with a mix of shock and a perverse sense of satisfaction. When I returned to the table, my expression was carefully neutral. Genevieve's brittle smile, their planned European vacation, and that urgent text message from her a few weeks ago. "Eleanor, we need to have a serious family discussion at Easter." Suddenly made perfect sense. They weren't just showing off. They needed something from me. The realization was as cold and sharp as the ice in Sterling's whiskey glass. Genevieve, ever the conductor of her social orchestra, decided it was time to involve me again. "Eleanor, tell everyone about your quaint volunteer work," she chirped, trying to paint me as the gentle, harmless do-gooder. "She helps refugees. You know, such noble work, if a little outside the usual circles." It was another attempt to define me, to box me into a role that emphasized her own perceived grandeur. I smiled, a genuine smile this time, but one that didn't reach my eyes. "Actually," I countered smoothly, "I've been thinking about Mom and Dad a lot lately. All those years ago, when I turned down that offer from the publishing house in New York, the air around Genevieve instantly chilled. My publishing house offer was always a sore spot for her. It was a tangible opportunity, a path I could have taken, a life I could have built, if I hadn't chosen to stay and care for our parents. It reminded her that my failure wasn't simply a lack of ambition, but a deliberate choice, a sacrifice she had never made. She cleared her throat, clearly flustered. Before she could deflect again, Sterling seized the opportunity to shift the focus. He raised his glass, clinking it loudly with a spoon. "Family always comes first, doesn't it?" he boomed, a theatrical grin on his face. "Which reminds me, Genevieve and I have a small announcement." All eyes turned to them. Genevieve, recovering quickly, took over. "Yes, we're thinking of a wonderful new family project. The old boathouse property, down by the lake. We're considering converting it into a beautiful family retreat, a place for all of us to gather for generations to come." She paused, letting the vision sink in. "Of course," she continued, her gaze sweeping across the table, finally landing on me. "It's quite an undertaking. We'll need all hands on deck for this project." Her words hung in the air, sweet and inviting on the surface. But my mind, now armed with the overheard conversation, translated her meaning instantly. They needed money, and they expected me to contribute. After the main course, a decadent roast lamb, the air in the dining room grew heavy with post-meal contentment for everyone but me. I helped clear the plates, a habit from years of caring for my parents, and followed Genevieve into the kitchen. Her polished facade, which she'd maintained so meticulously during dinner, finally began to slip. "You could try harder." "You know," she murmured, her voice tight, as she stacked dishes in the industrial-sized dishwasher. She didn't look at me. "The Millers and the Whites are important connections. A simple conversation wouldn't kill you." My patience, already worn thin, snapped. "Important for what, Genevieve?" I asked, my voice low but firm. "Your failing business?" She froze, her hand halfway to a crystal platter. The kitchen went silent for a beat, save for the hum of the refrigerator. Then, With a sharp, furious movement, she slammed the tray down on the counter. The clatter echoed in the suddenly tense space. She whipped around, her eyes narrowed, a viper's gaze. "Keep your voice down, Eleanor," she hissed, her words barely audible. "And stay out of things you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I retorted, matching her quiet intensity. "That's why I'm here, isn't it? Not for a warm family Easter, but because you need something." The words hung between us, stark and undeniable. She stared at me, her face a mask of outrage, but I saw a flicker of panic in her eyes. She knew I knew. As she struggled for a response, I thought about the years since Mom and Dad had passed. The quiet, solitary years. Years when I finally had the freedom to nurture my own passion. A passion she had always dismissed. After Mom and Dad were gone, I didn't just stay in my small apartment, shelving books at the library. I poured my heart into something real. Something that brought me genuine joy and, unexpectedly, success. Margot's Literary Treasures started small. A website selling handcrafted bookmarks, exquisitely bound leather journals, and, eventually, carefully curated rare books. It was a niche market, fueled by my deep knowledge and genuine love for literature. The Margot came from a nickname my dad used for me when I was little. The business wasn't just profitable, it was thriving. I had built a reputation, a loyal clientele, and a 6-month waiting list for custom orders and rare book acquisitions. I had intentionally kept it quiet, a secret pleasure. I knew Genevieve too well. If she knew, she would either claim credit for my brilliant idea or, more likely, demand a share. I returned to the living room, where Sterling, now on his 3rd or 4th whiskey, was launching into his grand pitch. "The Family Legacy Project," he called it. His voice boomed, full of false bravado, as he laid out his vision for the boathouse conversion. A slideshow projected images of idyllic family gatherings onto a screen, a stark contrast to the strained reality of our present. "This is an investment in our future," he declared, gesturing expansively. "A place for all of us, for generations to come. We're looking at a modest contribution of $50,000 from each family member to get this off the ground." $50,000. My stomach churned, but not from shock. From a cold, clarifying anger. He was asking for an enormous sum, acting as if it were a casual request, while his own business was sinking. Then, he turned to me, a condescending smirk on his face. "Eleanor, you of all people should appreciate this opportunity. With your limited resources, this is a chance to truly invest in something substantial, something that will provide security for your golden years." The implication was clear. I was poor, I was a failure, and this was their gracious charity, an opportunity for me to cling to their wealth. That was it. The final straw. The casual cruelty, the ingrained disrespect, the audacity of their request, all piled on top of the failure place card. It was time to drop the bomb. I met his gaze, my own eyes steady. "Actually," I stated, my voice cutting through the polite murmur in the room, "I do have other plans for my resources." Genevieve, who had been beaming at Sterling's presentation, scoffed. "What, Eleanor? Another library conference in Duluth? Or perhaps a retreat for your refugee volunteers?" Her tone was dismissive, designed to belittle, to put me back in my box. I held her gaze, a small, unreadable smile playing on my lips. "Something a little different. I'm opening a rare books gallery in Manhattan next month." The words landed like a physical blow. The room went silent. Sterling's glass paused halfway to his lips. Genevieve's jaw dropped. "That's absurd," Genevieve finally spluttered, her voice high-pitched with disbelief. "You can't afford Manhattan real estate. You work at a library." "Eleanor," she looked around the room, appealing to the others for validation, for someone to join her in dismissing my statement as a delusion. Instead of arguing, I calmly reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and tapped the screen. "Perhaps you'd like to see the website," I offered, holding it up for everyone. It displayed an elegant, minimalist design, showcasing beautiful images of antique books, a sophisticated address in a prime Manhattan neighborhood, and a glowing profile piece from a prestigious arts magazine. The article highlighted Margot Blackwell, literary antiquarian to watch. My professional name. Leo, who had been slumped in his chair, stared at the phone. He snatched it from my hand, zooming in on the details, his eyes wide. "Holy," he whispered, his voice full of stunned awe. "This is legit." The room's attention, which had moments before been fixed on Sterling's inflated dreams, now shifted entirely to me, to Margot Blackwell, the failure who was about to open a rare books gallery in Manhattan. The atmosphere in the room had shifted dramatically. All eyes were on me, not with pity, but with a mixture of confusion and dawning respect. I kept my voice calm, even as a thrill of defiance coursed through me. "Margot Blackwell," I explained, "is the professional name I use for my business. Margot's Literary Treasures. We specialize in rare and antique books. Just last month, I facilitated a private sale of a first-edition Hemingway for $340,000. Leo, who had been nibbling on an Easter cookie, nearly choked. His eyes bugged out, and he started coughing, spilling crumbs down his shirt. The Millers and Whites, usually so composed, exchanged stunned glances. The sheer number had shocked them into silence. Genevieve, her face flushed with a mixture of anger and embarrassment, couldn't take it anymore. She practically bolted from the room, muttering something about needing to get special Easter pastries from the kitchen. It was an obvious escape, a desperate attempt to regain some semblance of control. Sterling, ever the opportunist, saw an angle. His eyes, though still glazed from whiskey, held a sudden, calculating glint. He cleared his throat. "Eleanor, my dear," he began, adopting a tone of forced admiration. "This is truly remarkable. A rare books gallery in Manhattan. Imagine the possibilities. Your expertise, our property, the boathouse project. Think of the synergy. We could combine forces, a family enterprise." He was already trying to merge my thriving business with their failing scheme. I smiled, a cool, polite smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Thank you, Sterling, but I have no intention of diversifying my portfolio at this time. My focus is entirely on the gallery." The refusal was firm, leaving no room for negotiation. His face fell slightly, but he quickly masked it. I glanced around the room, taking in their expressions. The shock, the curiosity, the lingering disbelief on Genevieve's friends' faces. This was the moment. "Actually," I said, raising my voice slightly to ensure everyone heard, "I have something else I wanted to discuss while we're all together." I reached into my purse, pulling out a slim, official-looking envelope. It was Olivia, my sweet niece, who finally broke the tension with an act of quiet rebellion. Mom labeled Aunt Eleanor's seat, "The Failure," she stated, her voice clear and strong. She pointed to the place card that still sat next to me. The Millers and Whites gasped, their eyes darting to the card, then to me, then to the kitchen where Genevieve had fled. The disrespect, previously ignored or dismissed by the adults, was now undeniable, exposed by an innocent. I met Olivia's gaze, giving her a silent nod of thanks. Then, I turned back to the room, holding up the envelope. 7 years ago, I began, my voice steady. After Mom and Dad passed away, Sterling made a comment to me. He asked if I had seen Dad's will. He seemed suspicious, like he knew something was off. He mentioned that Genevieve had the will. Sterling, sobered by the revelation, looked up sharply, his eyes wide. He remembered. The room was absolutely still. "Genevieve had a will," I corrected, my gaze sweeping across the stunned faces. But it wasn't the final one. A collective intake of breath. The air crackled with unspoken questions. I slowly unfolded the document, its crisp pages rustling softly in the silence. "Dad changed his will 3 months before he died," I explained, my voice calm, clinical. "He was concerned about how you and Sterling were handling money, Genevieve. He'd seen how you operated." The kitchen door burst open, and Genevieve reappeared, her face contorted in a mask of fury. She had clearly heard. "This is a fabrication," she shrieked, lunging towards me, her hands outstretched as if to snatch the document. You're making this up because you're jealous. You're always so jealous. I calmly held the paper out of her reach. It's certified. Genevieve, I stated, my voice unwavering. I've had it verified by 2 separate attorneys. It's legitimate. The undeniable truth of my words hit her like a physical blow. She stumbled back, tears welling in her eyes, her face a ghastly white. You've had this for 7 years? Sterling rasped, his voice hoarse with shock and dawning dread. Why didn't you say anything? I looked at him, then at Genevieve, then around the room at the shocked faces of our extended family and their bewildered friends. Dad valued family peace above all else, I explained, my voice tinged with a sadness that was real. He knew this would cause a monumental rift. After everything, after taking care of them for so long, I decided I wanted to honor his wish, to avoid that conflict. So, I decided to make my own way, to build something purely on my own merit, without relying on any inheritance, without any family drama. So, wait, Leo interjected, his voice barely a whisper, his gaze darting between me and the document. This house. This sprawling colonial house. It's actually yours? I met his gaze, a profound sense of justice settling over me. Legally, yes, I confirmed. According to Dad's final will, this house was bequeathed to me. Not to Genevieve. Not to Sterling. To me. The silence that followed was deafening. Genevieve collapsed into a chair, her face in her hands, sobbing. Sterling just stared, utterly speechless. Because, I continued, my voice gaining strength, I'm tired of being treated like a charity case, like the failure. When you're the ones who have been living in a house that rightfully belongs to me, the truth is out, but the story isn't over. Stick around to hear Genevieve's shocking confession and see if she finally gets what's coming to her. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to follow this incredible family saga. The silence in the dining room was thick, heavy, almost suffocating. Genevieve sat slumped, sobbing quietly, while Sterling stared at me, his face devoid of its usual bluster. The Millers and Whites looked acutely uncomfortable, their polite smiles long gone. Mrs. Miller finally cleared her throat. Perhaps it's time we took our leave, she murmured to her husband, clearly wanting to escape the unfolding disaster. Genevieve lifted her head, her eyes red and swollen. No, this is just a misunderstanding, she stammered, trying to regain some control, some shred of her carefully constructed image. It's not a misunderstanding, Mom, Olivia said, her voice firm. She looked directly at her mother. I think you owe Aunt Eleanor an apology. The place card was cruel, and honestly, it's part of a pattern. Leo, still reeling from the news, chimed in. Is that why Grandpa changed his will, Mom? Because of how you treated Aunt Eleanor? Because you took advantage of her? Genevieve started to speak, attempting to dismiss their father as confused in his final months. But I cut her off, my voice even and clear. Dad wasn't confused, Genevieve. He was sharp as ever, and he anticipated this very reaction from you. I reached back into my envelope and pulled out another sheet of paper. I also have the letter Dad wrote, explaining his decision. Would you like me to read it aloud? Sterling, regaining a sliver of his defiance, puffed out his chest. What is this, Eleanor? Blackmail? You want us to invest in your little gallery now? Is that it? He still couldn't grasp the magnitude of what was happening. I fixed him with a steady gaze. I don't need your investment, Sterling. My business secured Series A funding last month from a private equity firm in London. Our current valuation is $12 million. Sterling's jaw dropped, a comical sight. Leo let out a low whistle, clearly impressed. Genevieve, who had been listening with a mixture of dread and disbelief, just stared at me. That's impossible, she muttered, shaking her head. You're a librarian. You shelve books. I was a librarian, Genevieve, I clarified, a faint, sad smile on my lips. Now, I'm the founder and CEO of a rapidly growing literary auction house and gallery with global reach. The words hung in the air, solid and irrefutable. In that moment, I saw it, the realization in Genevieve's eyes that her carefully built world was not just collapsing, but that her younger sister, the failure, was now undeniably, powerfully relevant. She felt a profound sense of irrelevance, a deep sting, worse than any financial loss. Then, I unfolded my father's letter. My voice, which had been steady, wavered slightly as I began to read. "My dearest Eleanor," I started. "This letter is for you, and for Genevieve, should she ever read it. I have observed many things in my final years. I've seen your unwavering devotion, Eleanor, your quiet strength and sacrifice. You gave up so much for your mother and me, without a single complaint." I paused, taking a breath. The room was silent, captivated. Genevieve had stopped crying, now listening intently. "To Genevieve," I continued, my voice softening, "I have seen your ambition, your drive for success, but I fear your foundation is built on sand. Your pursuit of material wealth often comes at the expense of what truly matters: family, integrity, and genuine connection. Your mother and I were always proudest of you, Eleanor, not because of what you achieved in the world, but because of who you are. Your kindness, your compassion, your quiet strength." My voice cracked slightly on the last words, a rush of emotion for my parents. "I leave this house to Eleanor, not as a reward, but as a safeguard, a place of true belonging, for a soul that has given so much. May it bring her the peace she deserves." I folded the letter, the paper trembling slightly in my hand. "He never wanted to cause pain," I said, looking at Genevieve. "That's why I kept silent for so long. I needed to prove something to myself, that I could build my own success, on my own terms, without relying on anyone's inheritance or fighting over what was rightfully mine." Olivia, without a word, rose from her seat and crossed the room. She sat down beside me, gently taking my hand. "I think what you did was incredibly brave, Aunt Eleanor," she whispered, her eyes shining with admiration. "Building something from nothing, and doing it with so much integrity." I looked at Genevieve, who was now utterly broken, her shoulders heaving with silent sobs. "So," I said, my voice quiet, cutting through the heavy silence, "the truth is out. What do you intend to do with this information about the will?" Genevieve looked up, her face a mess of tears and mascara. She glanced at Sterling, who gave her a subtle, urgent nod. The last shred of her facade crumbled. "Nothing," I stated, preempting her answer. "I don't want the house. I made my own way. What I want, what I have always wanted, is respect, and an apology, an honest one. For years of condescension, for making me feel worthless, and for today's deliberate humiliation." Genevieve finally broke. The words came out in a torrent, choked with tears. "I took it," she confessed, her voice barely audible. "I found Dad's new will, and I hid it. I was drowning, Eleanor. Sterling's deals were going south. We were losing everything, and I couldn't face it. I couldn't bear to lose this house, to lose everything I thought I had built." In that moment, as her desperation poured out, I finally understood. Her resentment wasn't just about my supposed failures. It was about my authenticity, my quiet strength, which had always highlighted her own fragility and fear. The Easter dinner had concluded, not with dessert, but with a confession that had shattered Genevieve's perfect world. As her tearful admission hung in the air, the Millers and Whites, looking utterly mortified, made their hasty and awkward exit. Their polite farewells were barely audible over Genevieve's choked sobs. The lingering scent of lamb and lilies now mingled with the sour tang of revealed secrets. I looked at Genevieve, her face blotchy and stained with tears, then at Sterling, who sat rigidly, his face pale and drawn. My initial anger had subsided, replaced by a quiet sense of exhaustion and, surprisingly, a glimmer of empathy. "Mom always used to say," I began, my voice softer now, "that grudges are like drinking poison and expecting someone else to die." Genevieve looked up, her eyes wide and raw. "I'm not saying what you did was okay, Genevieve," I continued, my gaze steady. "It wasn't. Hiding Dad's will, the years of condescension, today's deliberate humiliation with that place card. None of it was okay. But I'm tired of this poison between us. I'm tired of holding on to the resentment. And I'm tired of being treated like a doormat. I took a deep breath, ready to lay out the path forward. Things need to change, and they need to change permanently. No more pretending. No more of this family failure narrative you've tried to pin on me. We need clarity, honesty, and boundaries. I then turned to the elephant in the room, the house. Regarding this house, I said, looking around the elegant, yet emotionally charged dining room. I don't want to uproot your family, but there needs to be a proper, legal agreement acknowledging that I am legally allowing you to remain in a property that is rightfully mine. Sterling, who had remained silent since the revelation of my business valuation, stiffened. The idea of becoming my tenants, of living in a house that was technically mine, was clearly a bitter pill for his ego to swallow. Eleanor, that's a bit extreme, isn't it? He began, trying to find his old bluster. No, Sterling. It's not extreme, I countered, cutting him off before he could fully launch into an argument. It's called clarity and boundaries. No more taking advantage. No more assuming you can do whatever you want because you believe I'm a failure with limited resources. Then, I addressed the family legacy project. And as for the boathouse project, I said, making direct eye contact with both of them, that's clearly just a scheme to get money from family members to prop up your failing businesses. I will not be investing, and I advise Leo not to get involved either. Leo let out a small, audible sigh of relief, his shoulders visibly slumping. Olivia, who had remained by my side, spoke up, her voice gentle. Aunt Eleanor, will we still be invited to your gallery opening? I'd really love to see it. Leo quickly echoed her sentiment. Me too, Aunt Eleanor. And if you ever need any tech help, website stuff, I'm pretty good with computers. Their genuine interest warmed my heart. These two, at least, saw me for who I was. Genevieve, meanwhile, was staring blankly at the table. She finally looked up, her voice small and broken. I don't know if I can face your success, Eleanor, she admitted, her eyes filling with fresh tears. Not after everything I've said, everything I've done. You will, Genevieve, I said, a surprising sense of calm settling over me. Eventually, I looked at Sterling. Both of you should consider talking to some legitimate financial advisors, not for me, but for your own peace, to get things truly sorted out. Then, to my complete astonishment, Genevieve slowly pushed her chair back and walked towards me. She reached out, hesitantly at first, then wrapped her arms around me, pulling me into a tight embrace. Her body trembled as she whispered, her voice raw with emotion. I'm so sorry, Eleanor. Truly sorry. For everything. It was an awkward hug, stiff on my part at first, but as her genuine remorse washed over me, I found myself returning it. It was strangely healing. A physical breaking of the invisible barrier that had stood between us for decades. Forgiveness, not for her sake, but for mine. To finally release the resentment, as we parted, Olivia hugged me again, promising to call about the gallery. Leo shook my hand firmly, a new respect in his eyes. At the door, as I prepared to leave, Genevieve stopped me. She looked vulnerable, stripped bare of all her defenses. Eleanor, she said, her voice barely a whisper, the place card. The failure. I wanted to hurt you because I was afraid. Afraid you'd see through me. Afraid you'd realize I was the real failure, not you. She took a shaky breath, then met my gaze, her eyes surprisingly clear. You're not a failure, Eleanor. You never were. A genuine smile, one of pure release, spread across my face. The weight I had carried for so long, the burden of her judgment and my own suppressed anger, lifted. I simply nodded, then turned and walked out the door. Driving away from that sprawling colonial house, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, I felt lighter than I had in years. The air tasted crisp, free. I was free. Free from resentment, free from the need for validation, free from the decades of being defined by someone else's narrow perception. I was moving forward, not with bitterness or vengeance, but with the quiet power of a woman who had finally claimed her worth, built her own empire, and set herself free.